Welcome to Sex Care is Self-Care, a conversation on women's sexual health brought to you by the She Plus Foundation, formerly the Patty Brisbane Foundation for Women's Sexual Health. I'm your host, Patty Brisbane. Today I have a very, very special guest, Dr. Kelly Casperson. And Kelly, I'm so excited about you being here today. I'm excited about your book. But for those of people that are out there listening right now that you're brand new to them, tell them who you are, what you do on a daily basis.
Yeah, thanks for having me. So I'm Dr. Casperson. I am a urologist. And so that means you went to med school and then you spent 5 to 6 more years in residency learning how to operate on the genital urinary system. That's kidneys, bladder, ureters in the male body, penis, scrotum, urethra, in the women, vulva, bladder, vagina. So private parts. And about 6 years ago, I had a patient in my office who changed my world because she was complaining of a sexless marriage. And I didn't know how to help her. And I was kind of bored in my career at that time. You get good at what you do, 7 years in. And lightning struck my brain and it was like, you don't know how to help her. Does anybody know how to help her? So I just went down the rabbit hole of what does the science know and say about female sexual health. And that led me to start a podcast called You Are Not Broken, wrote the book called You Are Not Broken, Stop Shooting All Over Your Sex Life. And I always joke that sex got me into menopause because everybody said, well, you know what happens after menopause with your sex life? And I'm like, no. And why is everybody so afraid of hormones? Let's go into that. So it's just one thing after another. I joke I have two of the biggest niches in the world, women and sex. So I'll be busy forever. So now I spend my time in clinic. I have the Casperson Clinic, which is sexual health and hormones. And then I spend a lot of my time creating content, educating, advocating, trying to change legislation. So really kind of become one of the thought leaders in the space of female gender equality, sexuality, and hormones.
We need more of you. We really, truly
Thanks.
do. And I loved your book because I love the way that you debunked many of the myths and you broke down a lot of the barriers. And I'm telling everybody to pick this book up and to read it because there's so much value when you're reading this book. And it's just not for women.
That's right.
Men too.
And it's really for every generation. I have a chapter in there about menopause. And actually, when I was writing it, I'm like, do I put this in here? Not because I didn't think it wasn't important, but I was worried that younger people wouldn't read it. Because there's kind of this barrier of like, I don't need to worry about that. That's way down the road. And I'm like, no, everybody needs to know what happens to our body naturally as we get older. And a good amount of men read the book. A man read the book. He loved it. He's like, I learned so much. And then he's like, you need to write a book for the men. And I'm like, I think I already wrote it.
There you go.
Right. Like it benefits everybody.
I think that I think it's such a great book because it opens up your eyes to maybe what is going to happen down the road. So many, we wait and we shouldn't just wait for things to happen. I feel like when I'm in the know, I do much better.
Oh yeah. I always say women are smart. When given good information, they can make good decisions. They just didn't learn. And a lot of doctors didn't learn. Right. And so
I'm going to talk about that too, because I think I was shocked as I read the book on what doctors are not trained for in their books and why many of them are uncomfortable. So we're going to get to that. In your book, though, you talk about being a sexpert. So for the listeners out there, we know you're a doctor, but what's a sexpert?
Man, it's a good question. I'm sure there's not like an official plaque that it can hang on your wall when you are a sexpert. But I think of a sexpert as somebody who's first of all, you're just comfortable talking about the topic. People are like, you kind of talk about it like the weather. And I'm like, yeah, because it's important, like the weather, and like non-judgmental, right? Like everybody's sex life is different. And I don't claim to know all the answers, but I have an innate curiosity on understanding it because so many people feel broken because they never got a good education in the first place.
So many women are in their head about and thinking it's their fault when something goes awry with their body. So in this book, you reassure women that they are not broken and it's not their fault. How could we, as women who are listening today, start becoming comfortable with having the conversation with their physician, with their significant other? How do we start becoming okay with it?
Yeah. I think education's number one is like understanding words, understanding how to say the words, right? And understanding the bias that we have maybe against some words. Cause it's like the more comfortable and confident you are in talking about this, like this is normal, it is important. And the more educated you are, the more you realize I might need an expert's help, but I'm not going to defer to somebody else that they know more than me about my body or about what I want.
I think conversation and giving ourselves permission to open up is so important. And thank you for putting that in your book. And,
Yeah.
And having women look at that and say, you know what, I need to become more comfortable. I'm okay.
Yeah. I just heard this story about a woman. She was at she was at a kind of a weekend course and learning, for example, that about 70% of women will not orgasm just by putting something in their vagina. And she was one of the 70%, so she's in the majority. But somebody had told her that she didn't experience orgasm that way because she had sinned. And once she understood the science and was like, oh, most bodies don't orgasm by putting something in the vagina alone. We have to focus on clitoris. She realized that she had been kind of subject to like spiritual trauma because somebody had told her an inaccuracy. And the amount of healing that can come from just simple educational basics instead of what some non expert had told you that you took with you your whole life.
It's funny how women can open up, especially if they take a class or a course. So again, education helps them say, you know what, I was told this or I was taught that. And when they're able to view this and look at it and say, this was just a myth, this is not true. I love that. And I love that your patients and people are sharing these things with you. That's the reason I started my foundation 20 years ago, because I found that there was lack of information, not only for patients, but also for doctors. We didn't have enough money for grants. And that's why I started the She Plus, the Patty Brisbane Foundation, now the She Plus Foundation. And I love the fact that you challenge doctors to do better.
I get in trouble from time to time. Well, because I think, it's doctors, they feel I would say the majority of doctors agree with me. They're like, oh, yeah, you're right. We didn't learn this either. Some doctors feel like I'm kind of speaking about the club in a negative way. They're like, you're saying that doctors aren't helping people. And I'm like, yeah, I am. I am saying that doctors aren't helping people because I think we all do think we're doing a very good job, but it wasn't until I got on Instagram and social media and had the world DMing me their stories where I'm on the fourth doctor, I'm on the fifth doctor. My doctor just said, drink a glass of wine. My doctor said, get a new boyfriend. Like stupid, stupid stuff that doctors tell people. You realize, like, oh, we all think we're doing a good job, but the women are telling us otherwise, and we need to listen to them because we don't exist in a bubble. We can do better. So I think some doctors get a little threatened, but when they then understand, like, we've got data, 30% of OB-GYN residencies are taught about menopause. Oh man, maybe 1 in 5 medical schools discuss healthy sexuality, maybe, right? So we've got data to say, like, we're not teaching people about this.
Got to get comfortable with getting uncomfortable and having these open conversations.
Yeah.
You know, I feel like doctors such as yourself, a lot of the doctors who attend Ishwish, I kind of, do you attend Ishwish? Because if you attend Ishwish, I'm going to sign on with you. And people like our medical advisory board, they challenge. They're challenging the landscape of what's happening out there. Do you think it's getting better, or do you think it's getting worse?
I think it's getting totally better. I mean, and this is just, I have not been in this niche as long as you have. So I would like your opinion. But to me, I'm like, I started that my podcast is 5 years old, right? I started really doing this 6-ish years ago. And even just from 3 years ago, the amount of people talking about vaginal dryness, using lube, orgasmic inequality, that sex doesn't exist in a bubble and it's not your fault if you're the low desire person, you're not broken. Like the amount of conversations about that really, people realizing the gender inequality and what's available for treatments. Viagra's been around since 1998. We've got 10 different types of testosterone. That's for the men. For women, nobody knows about the 2 FDA-approved medications for low libido. We don't have a testosterone product. Vaginal estrogen's massively safe, but our federal government has a huge warning label on it that says it's going to cause dementia and cancer, right? Which is wrong. So it's like more people are becoming aware of the inequality in how we're all treated.
Yeah, it kills me that men have over 27 products for them for libido, but women have 2. We can do better. I really do believe we can do better.
100%.
So I challenge our government to help us out there. So I believe that the key to getting anything started is education. And I was floored in your book to find out that there was no curriculum when you're a med student when it comes to pleasure. So what are we doing by ignoring that pleasure's human? It's okay. We should have that. Why do you think that is? It should be in a physician's curriculum.
Yeah, whether it's shame or it's thought of as extra, right? Like it's not going to kill you. It's not going to kill you to have a low libido, right? But I would argue if a physician's role is wellness and healthy communities, healthy families, healthy individuals, especially in partnered relationships, not addressing sexual health, we've got a huge incidence of what they call gray hair divorces, gray divorces. Like people who kids are out of the house, we did that job, maybe our careers are winding down, and now we've grown apart, we're no longer intimate because of untreated genital urinary syndrome of menopause, or the man gets a prescription for Viagra and the woman is completely neglected. We're disrupting relationships. So to me, I'm like, I don't care if you think pleasure is extra. Intimacy and connection is deeply destructive when that's not addressed, and people are getting divorced at age 55, at age 60. That's half of your life savings is gone, right? And so to me, I'm like, this is a big issue. It's not just pleasure. Or meaning like pleasure really is everything. Maybe that's a better way to spin it.
Empty nesters. It's like now the kids are gone. Who are you? Where did you come from? We don't even know how to have conversations sometimes with our significant other. And even when it does come to pleasure, which I will get into further in these, but just being able to open up and talk about what our likes and dislikes. Several weeks ago, I did a podcast, and it was on endometriosis. And I wanted to bring in several age groups to this. And so I brought in my granddaughter who suffers with endometriosis. She's 21. And then I brought in someone who was in her mid-30s and somebody in their 40s. And I had an aha moment. And as they were describing what it was, how they were feeling and how they were able to talk to their doctors, it floored me because the 21-year-old really had issues with, when asked what was my pain like, I just would tell them it was like a 7. But when I got to the mid-40s, she was like, oh, let me tell you, I had no problem telling my doctor that this was worse than childbirth. So when you have a patient and you're working with them and they're having pain or they're having endometriosis and you give that pain 1 to 10, I know Talia was really kind of timid about saying it's the worst pain ever, but she didn't have a reference like the woman who had children. How do you help that patient?
I think I mean, the pain scale now is it's incredibly damaging, right? Like it was invented by the pharmaceutical industries to push narcotics. So the pain scale is incredibly subjective, not really rooted in science, and everybody's seven is different. Like I have patients who say they're at a 9 out of 10 eating a sandwich, right? So it's like, well, not really. Can't like my 9 out of 10, I can't eat a sandwich. So it's very subjective. So I don't put a lot of validity in the pain scale being helpful at this point. I think you need to explain it, and I tell women hot flashes, for example, because so many people will downplay that of like, you don't just say you have a hot flash. Say, I've got 18 pairs of pajamas because I have to go through 4 pairs a night because I'm soaking wet. Like, be very specific because that just helps. Like, our brains love stories. It doesn't have to be a long story. That was a 2 sentence story about hot flashes. But you got to be specific enough so they know how bad it is. Pain with sex is so bad. It feels like razor blades or that, like a credit card's being scraped on me. And it's so bad that I feel like my relationship's going to end over this. That's a lot more specific than being like, I have pain with sex. I don't know what the pain with sex means. You have to explain that.
Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes it's hard for them to have those words, you know.
Very much.
Yeah. And so we've got to find a better way, even as a parent, to talk to our kids about being comfortable when they're speaking to their physicians.
Well, you certainly can offer to practice, right? Okay, what are you going to tell the doctor? What's your goal for the visit? The doctor-patient visit in America in 2025 is fraught with many problems, but one of them is we just don't have time to connect. If you don't know what you want, what your goals are, what you want to make sure you get across, like you have to practice that or write it down. Because you get there, it's fast, you're stressed, they took your blood pressure, like, maybe there's an exam they got to fit in. It's not a lot of time. And so practicing that ahead of time is essential.
Why do you think that we're still fighting damn stigma when it comes to our bodies, ourselves, talking to our doctors, having an open conversation, even with a friend? You know, is it why?
I think generational trauma for sure. Like this has been going on for a while. I was talking about the feminists of the 1970s and stuff is like, dude, they fought to get bank accounts so that I can fight for gender equality in pharmaceuticals, right? It's like it is slow to change things, but every single woman who says, I'm not going to have sex when it's just for somebody else, I want to prioritize orgasmic equality. Like every woman that does that, she's going to teach that to her friends or to her children or to somebody around her. Like so many people are waiting for like society to change or for doctors to change or for government to change. It's like, have you read history? Do you know where change comes from? Like it comes from the people. You get enough of them all on board with this, that's how it changes. I take a lot of hope from the AIDS epidemic, right? Of like people were dying, they weren't trying any meds, nobody could get any access. Did the government and physicians change? Only after the advocates said, we demand more for this. We need to do something about this. Then the big ship started changing. So all the women who are like, I'm so angry, and then you should be angry, but don't sit at home in silence with your anger. That'll only destroy you, right? That'll just give you health problems. Of like, mobilize. I've got like 5 different advocacy things happening now. Like, that's not how it started, but it's like there's so much work to do. It's like, get involved.
Get involved. Use your voice. Stand up for what your needs and beliefs are, and start the conversation at, happy hour with your girlfriends, because there's always going to be somebody at that table. Might not be the person sitting right next to you, might not need the information, but the girl at the end of the table might. And you know what? And I always say, if it's not for you, pay it forward because you're going to meet somebody who's going to need that information.
Yeah. And you know this, Patty, but it's like the suffering is right underneath the surface and it's profound and it's common. Like there is you can't reach out your hand without finding somebody who needs help, you know? So there's a lot of work to do. People are like, haven't you done it all already? Like there's already a book about menopause. There's already books about sex. It's like, yeah, and we need 150 more.
Yeah. Oh, gosh. You're absolutely right. I mean, I think I'm so comfortable with it because, I mean, it's my life too. You know, I want people to feel comfortable. I have granddaughters who have said to me, I'm so glad I always had you to come to. They could always, I mean, sometimes I have to give a
So
poker
cool.
face, like when they tell me stories, but I'm glad I'm there. And I know that, and when they're married and they have children, they're going to pay that information forward.
Yeah.
And that's what we need.
Yeah.
We've got to get comfortable with this, both male and female, and stop being afraid to talk to our children because they're learning from somebody else. They're
Well, I mean, that's the thing is like, have you seen anything on television or Instagram or social media? Like, we live in a sexual world. Things are sold with sex, things are marketed with sex, people are vilified over sex, people are lifted up because of sex, right? Like, that's the world we live in. We've got to get comfortable talking about it because it's everywhere.
We do. We do. We've got to get comfortable. I believe it's podcasts and it's books like yours, You're Not Broken, both your podcast, your book, Instagram, like with Dr. Rachel Rubin and Dr. Christine Vaccaro, and
We love
many
them.
others who are helping break this stigma. Do you believe that as well?
100%. 100%. I mean, it's so many, medical people will be like, there's so much crap on the internet. It's like, yeah, the people with the crap are speaking. So that's why doctors also need to speak and the sex therapists need to speak and the people who are the sex educators. The other very frightening thing is how many of them have been silenced by these big platforms for using anatomically correct body parts, right? And how it's like, how do we get ahead when you can't say vulva? I mean, that's why podcasts are awesome because you can still actually say body parts on them.
It's there are no words. It does anger me because we should be able to say correct body parts, but
Yeah.
um, so it really opened my eyes. I had an aha moment reading your book about us being able to speak to our significant other about what we enjoy when we're together. Um, in my aha moment was you sharing a story about one of your patients who had come to you and loved having her nipples licked. Can you? I love that story. And anytime I like, did you read Kelly's book here at the office? They were like, did you read the nipple story? Because it's such a great story. And I think the reason people loved it so much is because we should be having that conversation. We should be able not to be a traffic cop, but to say, hey, I really love it when you do this. Instead of giving your partner the pleasures that you like, because I'm going to let you tell the story.
Yeah. Yeah, for people who don't know the nipple story, they're holding their breath because they're like, "What's the nipple story?" Woman really enjoyed nipple stimulation and didn't communicate that, but instead just decided to start stimulating her partner's nipples, and he hated it, but didn't communicate that. So then he avoided stimulating her nipples because he didn't like it, and so then now you've got just like a very big problem. The other like tip since the book's come out, Juliana Hauser's a friend of mine. She's a sex therapist, and her advice was ask your partner what you're good at. It's so good. And so it's actually going to be that's actually in my next book because it's such good advice because it's like who doesn't love hearing what they're good at, right? And then the thing that they say, you have no idea you're good at that, right? So it's like pretty darn fun. So I heard her, we were doing a thing on stage. I heard her say that. I was like, aha. Went home. I was like, "Hey, husband, what am I good at?" And he told me what I was good at, and I was like, "Really? I had no idea." And it's like you spend your whole adult life being good at something, you don't even know you're good at it. And it's just like I got such a kick out of it because it was like, who doesn't love hearing that they're good at something? Right. And I think in the dogma of like sex, we're like, you got to communicate about the bad stuff. It's like, don't forget to communicate about the good stuff.
There you go. There you go. Yeah, we can't hear enough about what we're good at. And I think it's good to have that conversation. And I think a lot of partners would be kind of like, oh my God, I didn't know that they thought that, or I didn't know that. So we're going to challenge all of you to have that night tonight.
Yeah. I mean, I think the other thing that it does is when you ask your partner what you're good at, you are actually hearing what they like. Right. So it's like you get both pieces of information out of that.
And we always want to get better, right? At
Yeah.
what we're
Yeah, I
good
think
at.
it's Rachel Rubin who says nobody's so good at sex that they can't get better.
That's right. I love that because that's so true. I know that in your book you talk a lot about hormones and hormone treatment. And I know that there's a lot of people out there that are like scared. They don't know who and where to turn. So, can you maybe list out some of the things that a woman should be asking her physician, and how does she go about finding that right physician to start hormone treatment?
Yeah. So same with sex is get educated first. And by that, there, it's an informal group called the menopause, but there's a lot of good vocal physicians that give all very consistent data. My podcast, my second book coming out is one of them. Mary Claire Haver, The New Menopause is fantastic. So really get educated first, because remember, the 10-minute doctor visit is no place for education anymore. We don't have enough time. So if you go in there and you say, "Tell me about menopause. Should I be on hormones or not?" Like, 10 minutes is not gonna do it. You really need to understand it and get over the fear that's in the zeitgeist and the ether of our nation since the Women's Health Initiative in 2002. Remember, there was a time in the 1990s where 40% of women were on hormone replacement therapy. Like, that happened. We dropped the iron curtain on them with the WHI. So for people to understand, like, we're not trying to get back to or do this crazy thing. Like, if we just get back to how we were doing in the 90s, it's probably better than how we're doing now with hormones. But so get your education first. I recommend Ishwish for hormone therapy, because usually many people who are trained in sex med are trained in hormones because they understand the crossover between healthy hormones and libido, healthy hormones and a functioning pelvis, healthy hormones and arousal and orgasm, right? So the Ishwish is actually a very nice place to start. Then they tend to be, because even if you go to the menopause.org, formerly known as the North American Menopause Society, you can take a test and be Menopause Society certified. I am, but that test doesn't tell you how to treat people with hormones. So even a lot of people who are air quotes menopause certified aren't going to be always the best resource for seeing what's right for you.
There you go. Okay. I am guilty of shooting all over myself sometimes. I do it.
We all are. We're human.
Yeah. Could you explain to the listeners out there what that's all about and how do we break that crazy cycle?
Yeah, well, you got to listen for the shoulds, right? Because so you just think it's like the law or how things are, and then you're like, oh, that's a should. Common shoulds with sex are a woman should orgasm with penis and vagina sex. Sex should be spontaneous. Sex should be easy. A lot of shoulds of like sex is you should have sex just because you're married. That means you should have sex for somebody else. Orgasms are difficult. There's so many. You shouldn't need hormone therapy because you should just age naturally. Like, it's anything that has a should in it is somebody putting their view on something, and might not be grounded in truth or fact.
There you go. Since Wicked is so popular right now, I love
So
that
good.
you mentioned Glinda the Good Witch. You've always had the power, my dear. That was your message in your book. But what would you say to the people listening right now? What would you tell them?
I think it's a radical idea for people to hear that your sex life is yours. We've deferred to maybe the other gender. We've deferred to experts. We've deferred to Hollywood on what, it's that perfectionism tendency that like, be a good girl, just show up and it should be fine and easy. Like, and realizing like, this is your sex life, and realizing you didn't learn good, healthy adult sex ed. Now it's on you to be like, okay, well, now you know that. What are you going to do about it? Right. And so many people want to just they just kind of feel like they should be entitled to something that the data actually shows like it takes practice and intention and communication and trial and error and prioritizing it. Not to tell people that it's overwhelming, but to be like, I can't sit here and be entitled to be like a top pickleball expert without putting in any time, education, knowledge, or practice, right? That's what sex is.
And we think because, our relationship is not like it looks in the movies or maybe what we're watching on TV. But it is. It's good communication. It's putting that effort in, that time in. And I appreciate you addressing that in your book and addressing it with us here today. I want to thank you so much for joining us. I know you can tell I love the book, and I love you teaching us to take care of our bodies and ourselves. Where can people find your book?
It's on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. So it's called You Are Not Broken, Stop Shooting All Over Your Sex Life. And it's available now. Oh, the audiobook's really good because I read the audiobook. So
yeah. You do.
Yeah. So if people like audiobooks, it's kind of fun.
I went through and then I decided I'm going to do the audiobook, and I loved it. I felt like you were with me every day, and then when I was finished, I missed you, and every now and then I just want to go back.
Well, you can get me weekly on my podcast.
Yeah, I know, and I love that too. If you liked what you heard today, please rate and subscribe to our podcast. For more information on the She Plus Foundation, go to sheplusfoundation.com. Remember, sex care is self-care, and sexual health matters. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.